Our next session is going to be about innovation. And in particular, can Latin America set the pace for innovation for other parts of the world? I'm quite a long-time Latin Americanist, and I'm trying to leave some of my skepticism away from the stage when we're looking at this theme, because I have the pleasure of introducing, for our interviewee today, the President and CEO of GE for Latin America, Reinaldo Garcia, who is a Brazilian who is telling me off stage that he feels more comfortable discussing business issues in English than in Brazilian because he spent so much time around the world. And with that, he brings a really valuable perspective, not just for the rest of Latin America, but for the world in general on the issues of innovation. Please, Reinaldo, join me on stage. Welcome.
All right, thank you,
Please
Justin.
have a seat.
This here. Thank you.
So I think you've said, Reinaldo, that in interviews that you see Latin America as one of the best places to do business in the world, and you've worked in many parts of the globe. So tell us, what is it about Latin America that we should be so optimistic about?
You know, I think emerging markets have been a big driver of growth in the last 15 years. But not every emerging market is the same. And in fact, I like to think about growth markets rather than emerging markets. And in that, I would even throw a few developed markets such as Australia, Canada. But if you think, let's think about China. China has a lot of people and doesn't have resources, right? India has a lot of people, doesn't have resources. Australia, Canada has a lot of resources, they don't have people. The Middle East has a lot of resources, has some people, quite a bit of people, some political instability, so it's a little more complicated. Russia has a lot of resources, has enough people, but the institutions have still yet to continue to evolve. Sub-Saharan Africa has a lot of people, has a lot of resources. There's a lot to be done there. It's a more complex environment. When you think about Latin America, you have a lot of resources and a lot of people. And you have institutions that have really become stronger over the last 20 years. So I think the environment, the context is extremely favorable in Latin America. And because of that, I think in the mid to long term, it's probably one of the most relevant, important markets in the next 10, 15 years, and certainly one that will continue to drive a lot of growth.
So you were talking earlier, you spend quite a lot of time in Mexico these days, the second biggest market in Latin America, obviously. I think one of the things you said earlier today was that you go to Mexico as a very competitive business environment and to Brazil for the size of the market. What does Brazil need to do to tackle the competitiveness issue?
You know, I think these two markets are very important. They are different. Brazil is a very attractive market because there's a lot, GE is an infrastructure company, right? And there's a lot of infrastructure projects going on in Brazil right now. Ike was just, talking about some of that. So I think there is as of now, it already exists a lot of infrastructure projects. Many more will continue to come, okay? So from a market standpoint, there is a lot of attractiveness, okay? I think the country has embarked on a focus on innovation, and I think this is a real big deal. But when you think in terms of with all the blessings that this country has and all the success that it has already demonstrated, I think there's some challenges that have to be dealt with. One is when you look at investment ratios, China invests 48% of its economy back, right? India, 32%. The average in Latin America is 22%. Peru, which has had a very strong economic growth in the last decade, invests 25 to 20%, 28%. Brazil's 19%. So I think investment ratio is one that has to be improved. I'm optimistic about this, and as I told you, a big factor in it is interest rates, right? Because interest rates that have been historically very high in Brazil have started a tendency to be lower, and the bias is towards lower interest rates as we go forward. I think this will change the relative price in the country. It will motivate investment, particularly in the private sector. You know, when you think about infrastructure investment, you know, of the 48%, 11% in China is for infrastructure. Brazil is 3.4. Imagine if that was double, right? I think this is going to be a huge point going forward, right? So I think that is a favorable change that has already started. I think the other one is education. You know, Korea is a good example. In 1960, Korea GDP per capita was the same as Sudan. And today they are a developed country, right? Korea doesn't have much natural resources. They have an average size population, but what they have done is they have invested enormously in education. The numbers are really astounding. 82% of the students go to the university. An average income, an average household spends 30% of personal income in paying for extra classes for the students. More than 80% of the students in Korea spend more than 10 hours a day in classes. I certainly didn't do that. And so I think this whole miracle of Korea is all certainly very much connected with what they have invested in education. So I think in Brazil, investment in education is a big deal. I see there is, first of all, a realization that this has to happen. So it always starts with understanding that you got to change. And I think things like Science Without Frontier is a very important program. So this is good. More has to happen. So I think education is a huge deal, which as infrastructure projects begin to grow, and we're going to have a lot of that. You're going to need a lot of project managers, a lot of engineers, and we need more and more of those, right? So I think this is a second point. And the third one, perhaps is the most difficult one. It's the ease of doing business. You know, when you look at Latin America, Chile, Peru, even Mexico has the ease of doing business index is very favorable. I think Brazil has to continue to make improvements in that area. And that one includes a lot of different things, you know, from the tax system, from social charges, to the bureaucracy and all that. So again, this is very difficult. It's not an easy one, and you probably cannot do this all at the same time. It's one at a time. But I think there is a realization that this is important and has to change. So I think these are the three things that are important. It is investment ratio, it's education, and the ease of doing business.
And all of those things would create an environment more propitious to innovation. And one of the, GE obviously is a company that's known for some particular innovations in the frugal innovation sphere. So in particular, you know, the electrocardiogram machine that GE created in India for a fraction of the cost, of more stripped down versions, fraction of the cost of the ones that have been developed in richer markets. It seems that Brazil as a market where, as was flagged up, I think it was by David Neeleman in our last conference, they earn a fifth of what Americans earn, but pay 5 times more than they do for most consumer goods. You're opening a research facility or investing in R&D in Brazil at the moment. What do you think is the role for, what do you see happening in terms of frugal innovation in Brazil? Are you going to be investing in that?
Look, you know, what you probably call frugal innovation is what we call reverse innovation. Okay, innovation for, you know, is made a big wave of innovation starting in the 19th century and permeated throughout the 20th century, all in the United States and Europe. And any technology sold in a Brazil or in India or China was developed in the United States or Europe for 100 years. In the last 2 decades, this began to change. And you mentioned this example of the ECG machine. I think, you know, I have another example of an ultrasound machine, which is the size of a mobile phone, okay? That was developed by China and India engineers in our healthcare business. And what they were trying to do, they were trying to solve the problem for the way they understood the problem with the concepts they had. And that product could only have been developed in those markets because they were thinking that way, right? They were trying to resolve particular problems of distance, cost, availability, or just basically the people, could they afford to pay for the exam? So these are very great machines that address that particular problem. And by the way, this ultrasound machine that it's the size of a mobile phone, or the ECG that you talked about, have now gone back to the developed markets, okay? And they are selling extremely well. So I think having the innovation on site to resolve the challenges of that particular market will bring the right solution and no more than that. Because you don't want to over-engineer the product. You want to engineer the product for what it's supposed to do, okay? So we certainly have learned those lessons in China and India. We will do that here, okay? We are opening our center now in Rio, and we have already hired a bunch of engineers and scientists, and that is the hope, to resolve the challenges that this market has. And by the way, there are many interesting things in this country that you can really only find here. The oil, the subsea pre-salt oil that there is in Brazil, they're under the very difficult environment. So the challenge that you have in order to get that oil, you mostly only find it here. So if you want to resolve that, you have to be here. Mm. So it's, you throw everything else out and you say, look, if I really want to resolve that, I have to understand the problem there. I cannot try to do this from far away, okay? So subsea is clearly one of our pillars of our research center. So is systems integration, smart systems, and the other one, which is biofuels. Brazil is a pioneer in ethanol production, the best. If you want to really develop processes for that industry and understand combustion of biofuels, no better place to do it than here. So it will be a center of excellence for the world for biofuels, okay? So I think, kind of connecting this with the prior question, there's this notion that, Brazil, the cost is always higher. I don't subscribe to that. I'll give you a few examples, okay? One of our businesses is aircraft, it's aviation. We make aircraft engines. And an aircraft engines, whether you know or not, but this happens, it has to come off the wing once in a while and be maintained, in which you have to take it completely apart and put it all back together. So you have to rebuild this engine, right? Very important and delicate work. You can't get it wrong. The best overhaul facility for aircraft engines in the world is in Petropolis, in the mountains, not necessarily the easiest way to access. It's the most competitive in the world, the fastest turnaround. Many airlines around the world fly their engines over some of our overhaul facilities in other countries to bring them to Brazil because it's the fastest turnaround. So you can actually get competitiveness in a real meaningful way.
And what's been the secret there then?
Look, this is, it's doing the work to get the outcome that you need in that particular place, okay? So that shop really works phenomenally well. It's the culture of that team, okay? So it can be done. I'll give you another example. I was in the healthcare business for 15 years, and one of the challenges that we had in one of the products we make, it's what do you call a cath lab, where if you have a heart intervention or with a catheter, to roll through the arteries there and put a stent.
Technology's great when it works.
Hello? Able to use this.
Can we have a, yeah.
No, I have this microphone. Okay, on. Hello? Hello? Is it on? Yeah, it's on. Okay. So we have, this business is a cath lab. So we had a product that is a wonderful product that works, it's used largely in research facilities in the very specialized hospitals, but for the main use of that cath lab in the majority of the markets, we really could never get to the right product. Okay? We couldn't get to the cost point, the features, and lo and behold, we found a company in Brazil that had the best technology in that segment with the lowest cost in the world. We bought it. So it can be done. If you have the right, if you're working on the right segment, if you're trying to resolve the problem for the problem, you can get competitive anywhere, in any environment. Okay? There's no question there's a lot that can be done to increase the competitiveness in this country, but you can have world-class, best-in-class right here. And these are two examples.
Okay, well, I'd like to see if the audience has any questions in response to some of the comments so far. But talking about that in the meantime, while the audience is thinking about questions, I guess one doesn't need to worry so much about how innovative or competitive a company like GE is going to be, because it has the resources, it has the experience, it has the expertise. But if you're thinking about an economy as a whole, you also need to make medium and smaller firms more competitive. What could the government be doing differently? I mean, for example, BNDES just had its 60th anniversary, but it's still lending most of its funds to the biggest companies. Should more of state money be funding smaller firms to promote innovation, or what do you see as a
I think there are two things which are very important. One is, if this country is going to be real big in innovation, I really believe it will be, one thing has to get better, and that is the time it takes to file a patent, okay? Or actually get a patent done. It takes a very long time here, 2 to 3 times longer than in the US, for instance. I think something like, this may not be exactly right, but it's something like 8 years to file, to get to the patent process. It's not very motivating for an inventor. But I think the other one is, you mentioned about the smaller companies. I think there has to be a big focus on helping smaller companies getting through the end. And that is, one is making money available. The other is, again, ease of doing business. Sometimes things are extremely complicated, particularly for smaller companies to handle. And I think if this country were to improve on that front of easiness of doing business, you'd get a pretty significant improvement in the native industry, particularly in the small to mid-size companies.
Well, I'm sure there must be some questions for Reinaldo. If just like to raise your hand if you have a question. Lady over here, if you could please just identify yourself.
My name is Joy Huffman, and I'm an MBA student at Georgia State and at Sorbonne University. And my question has to do with the fact that GE is a global company and also has a lot of global talent as a result. And when you're talking about innovation, you need to have the talent in the right place at the right time. But given the fact that Brazil has a huge issue with visas and getting visas is very difficult, what are some of the strides that GE is taking to either get international talent down here to Brazil to work on some of these projects, or developing the talent that's already here?
It's a very good question. I mean, the visa is an example of disease of doing business too. Okay, I think it is very complicated, and I have lived in many countries. I have gotten work visas in other countries, and some of them are extremely fast. In Brazil, with the time process, the time and the process is very cumbersome. Okay, we go through the same thing. Okay, but you can't think in terms of weeks. You got to also think in terms of years. So I think we have, in terms of innovation and engineers and scientists, we're really trying to get a large portion, or the majority of them, from the country. We have a few that have come from outside, but like me, there are Brazilians that came back. Okay, so they didn't have to go to the visa process. So I think it's the visa is just one element of the disease of doing business that has to be tackled. Okay, But I believe that innovation and globalization, the ability to get talent from anywhere and exchange ideas is absolutely critical. Where in my prior job to this one, I was in Paris, and in our office there, we had about 1,600 people, and there were 38 nationalities. In my direct staff of 24, I had 14 different nationals. Different nationalities. So I think this is the power of a modern company, in particularly on the innovation side.
Final question. I'll take these two.
Great.
The gentleman at the back and one at
Yes.
the middle there. I'll take them at the same time. You could be as brief as possible, please.
Sure. Yes, it was interesting to hear that you were more comfortable discussing business in English than in Portuguese. So I wanted to ask you, in the education component of your innovation equation, what is the importance of a second or third language for the innovation and development of business in Brazil?
Great. And I'll just take the final question here at the same time.
After, where you already want them
Sure.
to...
I'll take the question, and then if you don't mind, we'll...
Sure.
Yeah, I heard two words in your presentation, one innovation and the other Latin America. I mean, innovation, I believe in it in Brazil. Unfortunately, is used in jeito brasileiro and overcoming, complexity of doing business. How can you be innovative when you're using your own energy and that? The second piece is Latin America. I mean, if you look at the globalization, blocks are very important. I don't see a big integration in Latin America where Mercosur is not that powerful and Mexico is not really trading with Mercosur.
Okay, that's a lot of things. Languages.
Okay. Yeah. So language, I think language is very important. Okay, you gotta have. I think English helps. It has become kind of a global language. So I think it's important to have a second or third language. And I'm sorry, I of course I speak Portuguese. I'm Brazilian, but all my education was outside of Brazil. And I realized when I came back last year in my first press interview that I spoke a terrible Portuguese in business. There's specific vocabulary. The question on Latin America and the Brazil or innovation in the so much energy devoted to the complexity. Yes, there is, but there is you can still bring innovation to reality and to market. The people, our scientists. I'm already getting my sleeves up and getting into the mud with our engineers and scientists in some of the projects. It's fascinating. They are making progress. Okay. Now the question now is how you bring that to market. And hey, it's part of the challenge. Okay, but it's being done. Look at. I'll go back to this. The ethanol production in Brazil. It's a beautiful example. If it wasn't done here, it would be making corn ethanol, which is 14 times less energy efficient, right? But because there was persistence and incentives are very important sometimes when you're trying to develop a new industry, right? So enough on that. Latin American integration, yes, this is not the European Union, okay? Maybe it's not.
That's a model for us all.
Thank God. But I think there is a lot of opportunities for more integration in Latin America. There's no question about that, okay? And I think it's upon all of us to continuously talk about it. I always say this, the biggest driver of economic growth 100 years ago in the United States were the railroads between East and West. If we had a few of those in Latin America, you might have a better chance. Okay.
Well, on that note, I know we've run over our time. Thank you very much, Reinaldo Garcia. Please join me in thanking him, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you.